Welcome to Creative Conversations, where I ask my guests, what does the word creativity mean to you? My name is Nina Lenton. I'm an untangler and coach, and I work with founders and freelancers who have lots of ideas, but aren't making progress on the ones that really matter to them. And I'm here today with Jo Grubb, who does design and branding for charities. So this episode is going to be a bit different because Jo's going to interview me. She's going to ask me a bit about my reflections across all of the series that I've done so far of Creative Conversations. But first, I need to ask, what does the word creativity mean to you?
Ooh, so my business is literally called JG Creative, which are my initials and the word creative. And it might not sound very creative, but for me, it really epitomized that creativity for me isn't just what I do, it's who I am. And I feel like I've always been creative. One of my earliest memories is winning a drawing competition in the local paper where you had to design Strawberry Shortcake's birthday cake. And I won the opportunity to meet Strawberry Shortcake and win some Strawberry Shortcake toys. Honestly, core memory. But I'm very, very lucky in that I've always known that that's what I wanted to do. And it's not just design and drawing. I play instruments, I paint, I draw, I bake, sew, act, like any outlet that creativity can kind of come out. That's what I've always loved to do. And I do think that we're just naturally hardwired to be creative. I mean, look at cave paintings, right from the very beginning of time, we've needed to create something. And I used to work in a place called magical place called the Make Lounge in London when I lived down there. And they ran workshops so you could come in and do cake decorating or cooking or crafting or make a carrier bag or do screen printing or something. And I was just there to assist and run the shop. And when people came in, they'd be so nervous. They'd be like, I'm not going to be any good at this, or it's just a bit of fun, or my friends dragged me along. And then like 2-3 hours later, they would be coming up to you with these cupcakes or this bag that they'd made, so excited and so proud of themselves and just desperate to go home and show people. And I think that's what creativity does. It literally lights us up. It connects us to something that is so fundamental to us. And as well as it being something we can create, I think it's also just a way of thinking. So I used to be in a relationship with a guy who was a tour manager for a band, and logistics were his kind of bread and butter. That's what he did. And, he was always really, sometimes he'd be like, I don't know how we're going to get here, here and here. And I'd look at the map and go, what about this? And he's like, my God, I never would have thought of doing that. Like, I think it's just literally a different way of thinking. It's like the rules apply in a different way. But I loved what you said in your book, which is it's the most important thing we have. It's what makes us human, and nobody can take it away from us. And I think watching my daughter kind of be creative is just kind of, kids just know instinctively how to be creative. Recently it was how to turn her Barbie doll into Rumi, one of the Huntrix characters, which, spoiler, involves a lot of purple marker. But it's just like they just are naturally problem solving in creative ways.
Yeah.
I think it's almost something we have to unlearn rather than something we have to learn.
Yeah, that's just making me laugh about Barbie dolls and purple pen. I also have similar experiences.
It gets everywhere.
It does, yes. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing your definition. And I think that probably has a lot in common with some of the other definitions that people have given and some of the themes that people have talked about. So I'm now going to hand over to you to ask me some questions.
How exciting. How do you feel being the guest?
Oh, it's a bit weird. Although, I mean, I have been on podcasts, so it's not an entirely scary experience.
Okay. So you've recorded 21 episodes now of your Creative Conversations podcast over 3 series. And I'm so excited to find out more about the conversations and, importantly, what you've learnt by talking to people. But first, I need to know, how did you come up with the idea for the podcast?
Well, it sort of happened by accident, actually. I did have the idea, the name Creative Conversations, I had probably a few years before I started the podcast. It just, ideas just pop into your head, don't they? And so it obviously came to me that I wanted to have some conversations about creativity, but at that point I didn't know what I wanted, how I wanted that to be. So it sort of, nothing happened with it really. And then it would have been it must have been 2.5 years ago. I was thinking, I need to be more visible. I was getting frustrated with writing blog posts that it felt like nobody ever read. They used to read them, but these days people just don't read so much, or it doesn't feel like they do. I think they consume content in a very different way. Yeah. And so I wanted to be more visible. And so my immediate thought was, maybe it is about video, because I'd got used to sharing photos of me. I'd had a couple of coaches who had persuaded me and made me make photos bigger, and gradually got me comfortable with doing that. And so video was sort of the natural next thing. And as with all these things, I think sometimes you come across people when you need them, don't you? Yeah. So I happened to see a post one day from somebody I knew who was in the Doing It for the Kids group, Al Booth, who produces podcasts and is also a live presenter. He's been on TV and radio, and he'd done this video which he'd shared to LinkedIn, which was about how he could make potholes sound interesting. And this obviously stuck in my head. I thought, right, I'm going to contact him and I'm going to get him to help me be on video. So that's what I did. And over the course of, it probably took 4 or 5 months or so for me to get comfortable. But what I realised in the process of some of the things that we did was that actually I liked recording conversations, that actually having a conversation was much easier for me. I realised that conversations were a good way to talk about creativity.
Why were you so interested in asking people about creativity specifically?
I think because my journey in self-employment involved quite a bit of creativity. So in the early stages, probably the first thing I did actually was I was writing a blog. I was writing creatively and I was taking photos. And by doing that, it just it brought back something that I maybe had lost, that I'd lost along the way of doing a lot of marketing and project management logistics, and somehow creativity just wasn't there. It wasn't really something I did on a day-to-day basis or in my spare time. And so part of my journey into being a freelancer and all the things I've done since was accessing that creativity. And when I got more into it and did, as you do, you kind of do some coaching programs, you come across other people who are different from yourself. And I think in the course of that, I then also realised that people have different strengths, different things that they enjoy, that they're good at. And so I think that's what I decided I wanted to explore with the conversations. So the first series of the podcast was actually recorded as videos. So I did 3 episodes, and it was actually just not quite the first 3 people I spoke to after I had the idea, but I happened to be talking to Emma, who was the first guest, at a networking meeting that she runs locally. And I said, oh, actually, I'm thinking of doing this thing called Creative Conversations. Do you fancy being a guest on it? It's just recording a video and having a chat about creativity and ideas. And she said, yes. And so I did the 3 of them. And originally they were just on YouTube. And then I thought, well, why don't I just put the audio out there as well? Because in my freelance world, I'm surrounded by people who do podcasts. And I think also having got comfortable on video, working with somebody who works in podcasts, that was all sort of in my head, I guess. So I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose by doing it, putting it out as a podcast as well. And then when I came to think about doing a second series, the barrier that was putting me off was actually the video. So in the end, I thought, well, I think sometimes sometimes you can have ideas and they can be quite big, can't they? And you talk yourself out of doing them because there's so much involved. Whereas actually, if you say, what's the essential bit of this idea? And the essential bit was me having conversations with people about creativity and sharing them. So with that in mind, I just thought, right, it's going to be a podcast. And then I scrapped the video apart from for social media.
Perfect. And I think probably me, like a lot of people, think that doing a podcast would be amazing and really cool. And I'm aware it's probably not as easy as it looks or easy as it sounds. What do you wish you knew at the beginning that you know now?
I think people often talk about the fact that actually the reason people start a podcast and maybe only do one series of it is because once you've done it, you realise how much is involved in it. I think that it's the kind of thing, if I had the budget for it, it would be lovely to just turn up at a podcast studio, record my episodes and get someone else to just do all the stuff. Yeah. Because that's the thing that you don't see. You are recording this, but then I will have to edit it. So I have to get an hour's worth of conversation into what is naturally which bits of the conversation are naturally useful. So sometimes that's actually 45 minutes. Sometimes it's 30 minutes. It just depends on what topics come up. So there's editing all of that. And then there's just the little bits like you have to write something about the episode before you can schedule it, because you've got to have your show notes with all your links. And it doesn't take hours and hours to put together. And because I've now been doing it, I've now sort of done 3 series, I now have a template. So all I need to do is just pop the person's name and the websites and a little description. But it's like a sort of staged process that I have to go through, and then just making sure that I tell people about it. Yeah. And I think, what would I say to somebody who is just starting out with a podcast? I would say actually probably try and keep it simple, because I have definitely made life more complicated for myself by being enthusiastic and deciding to book in 9 guests for a series, and deciding this last series, to do them weekly, to put them out weekly, because it means that you either have to schedule things ahead of time or you have to kind of do certain tasks every week. So I think if I were talking to someone who wanted to start a podcast, I would probably say maybe just do a few episodes. There's no reason you can't just do 3 or 4 episodes and put them out every couple of weeks. I think one of the things I have learned as well is about how people consume podcasts. With listener, I tend to respond to marketing. So if I see a clip on social media or somebody mentions they're talking to somebody in a particular episode, I will think, oh, that's one I want to listen to. So I will listen to specific episodes rather than having a show that I listen to. Yeah. Just because of my own listening habits and things I do in my spare time. Yeah. Whereas some people have their favourite shows that while they're walking the dog or while they're doing the washing up, they will listen to a podcast and they will have their sort of favourite shows.
And that's exactly how I do it. Yeah. And that's what's really good about the apps now, because you can subscribe to your favourite shows and then they all just get filtered into your thing and it just plays the next one of everything. So over the last 3 series, you've spoken to 21 different guests, very different people. But are there some common themes that have emerged as you've been asking them, what is creativity?
I think, well, the common theme about the definition of creativity is probably that there isn't one thing, because I think creativity means so many different things to different people. I think that, some people have talked about creating something from nothing. That's creativity. Being able to put something on a blank page. Whether an idea is big and then gets gradually honed down. And what creativity actually, what counts as being creative as well, I think, is one of the other things that I've come across, that, if you ask someone in the street, what's creativity, they would probably say, oh, graphic designer's creative, an artist's creative. They might say somebody who writes books is creative, but they probably wouldn't say, someone who solves problems. They wouldn't necessarily think of things like gardening or making cakes or anything like that that just involves either some sort of thought or something that comes from you. I think, to me, that's the essential thing. It's that it's all about you and who you are, and we all think in different ways, and we all express ourselves in different ways. So for example, I was at a networking event last week, and I was talking to somebody about my book, and she said, oh, yeah, I'm not creative. And I looked at her, and the way she'd got her hair with different colours. I said, you are creative. Look at your hair. But she didn't see herself as creative because she did a job that she didn't think was creative.
Yeah.
Even though she actually worked for a company that made something that was very creative, which is also quite interesting.
It's definitely what's the word?
Self-identify?
It's definitely something that you either identify as being or not. I think people can get a lot of imposter syndrome around creativity, and it might not be their job, but they could be incredibly creative. A lot of scientists are creative because they're literally trying to solve genetic problems or whatever, and that takes a lot of creativity, a lot of thinking differently.
Yeah.
I loved what one of your guests said. You do need to be creative to be artistic, but you don't need to be artistic to be creative.
Yes, Hannah.
I think if
Hannah said that.
Paint, then that's it. They're not creative.
Yeah, and I think actually that's something that comes out in that episode. So that's Hannah Christensen, who's the founder of Creative ID, and that's all about how are you creative, not are you creative.
Yeah.
So, and that's quite a lot about creative thinking and about having ideas.
Yeah.
But bearing in mind that people then express themselves in different ways.
Yeah. And I think if you asked any kid if they were creative, they'd be like, yeah, like they wouldn't even think about it. But most grown-ups would say no. And it's interesting, isn't it, how we just, like either school or learn that creativity is something some people have and others don't. It's a shame, really, because it's so important. I think that what I've learned listening to your podcasts are how other people manage their idea generation and their creative process. And people seem to have lots of different ways that they generate ideas. And then importantly, because I think when you are creative, you come up with loads and loads and loads and loads of ideas. And then the skill is in honing those down to the ones that are either practically doable or going to work the best. So have you learned any tips or maybe kind of things that you've started doing differently because you've heard how other people do it really well?
I think there were a couple of people I particularly remember talking about ideas and kind of whether to do something with them. So Abby Moore, when she talks about it, she said how she has a book that she puts her ideas in, which actually is really is such a good idea. If you're someone who has lots of ideas, you just need somewhere to put them quite often, because I mean, I'm someone who has lots of ideas, and a lot of people I work with they just jump on those new ideas and get distracted by them rather than necessarily thinking whether it's the right idea for now. So I think Abby's approach of put it in a book, come back to it later. If it's a really good one, and I think that for her comes from having been in business long enough to have maybe made the mistakes and maybe tried to do things and realised that actually that's being a distraction, and actually this is the thing this one is a good one, but it probably needs some time to implement it. So I think, yes, her notebook of ideas was a great one.
Yeah.
I think, and so she talked about it in in her episode, we were talking about domain names and again, the sort of ability to...
I've got so many domain names. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of... I'm not sure whether all the bits about domain names ended up in the episodes because so many people talked about them and it wasn't always relevant. But it's a very, very common theme, isn't it? People who have lots of ideas, you buy the domain name, and then a year later it wants to renew, and you think, why did I buy that one? What was I doing with that one? Because You're convinced that everyone else is going to want that domain name because it's such a brilliant idea that you've just had.
And there's some domain names that I've paid year after year after year because I really believe it's a great idea and I really want to do something with it. And by owning the domain name, it like tricks myself into believing that I will do something with it. And actually, I'm just throwing money away. It's so frustrating. So frustrating. Or in the time that you're thinking about it, someone else does that great idea and you're like, no, I thought of that years ago.
Yeah.
Very annoying.
Yes, it's but yes, so Anne talks about that in terms of domain names, and I think she seems quite disciplined as well with whether to do something with an idea or not.
And doesn't she have that kind of does it serve me or stress me test?
Yes, yeah, that's the phrase that sticks out from that episode. Yeah, so she was a guest in series 2,
and that's how she kind of categorizes whether an idea is she's just finding it stressful or actually she can see that it's going to serve her.
Yeah. And I think, because I think as well, it's whether an idea comes back to you. Because, in the same way that I'd had the idea for creative conversations, and at the time, I think what I was trying to do with it probably wasn't going to work. But naturally, it kind of came back later on when I'd got other things in place that were ready for it.
Mm-hmm. And I think there is something about that process of sitting with it. Like whenever we had a creative brief to respond to, we all just read it through together the night before and then didn't do anything. But your brain is amazing at working on problems and thinking about them. So the next day when we sat down to brainstorm it, we always had much better ideas than if we just read it cold in that meeting. So I think, there is something about, and everyone says about coming up with ideas in the shower, and it's literally because you're not being distracted by anything else, and your brain has got a bit of space and time to think about something, and we're so bombarded with things that we very rarely give ourselves the time to do that.
Yeah, and I think that came out as a theme in quite a few of the episodes actually, because it was quite interesting. Kelly's episode in series 2, she talks about website design, and she talked about a website being like a painting, how you sort of design it. She'd design it and then step away from it and then maybe come back to it half an hour later and make some tweaks and then maybe leave it and come back to it the next day. So she talks about website design being like painting. I know that when I talked to Matt, actually, again, series 2, he didn't think he had a creative process until I asked him about it. And he's a writer. And he was talking about how he just gets all the ideas out and then often just put something together, but that's not necessarily the version that the client then sees because he then reflects on it and then has that sort of quiet time away from an idea before actually the real ideas emerge.
All of these scheduling tools for creatives really make me laugh because the one thing you cannot do with creativity is force it. You can't sit down and go, right, I will now design this brand's logo. Because if you're not feeling it or you haven't got inspiration, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think we have to build flexibility into our schedules as well so that we can work on it when the ideas strike. And quite often that's last minute panic. That is the thing that motivates me the most.
In fact, I've chatted to quite a few graphic designers actually. So I know Bhavini talking about her process again has a lot of space in it and how she draws before she even gets anywhere near a computer. And then Layla in series 3, she talked about how actually sometimes the ideas she has to give some of the ideas to the client before she realizes which ones are the good ones because they will give feedback on it. And talking about how she has to trust that actually the right ideas will the ideas will be there. That just there's definitely an element of trust, of trust that new ideas will come, or trust that something will shape itself in the right way.
Definitely. It's definitely a trust the process thing. And I think the more experienced you are, the more you've kind of honed how to shortcut the way to the ideas. But you still get those projects where nothing will come. Like sometimes the client's giving you the brief and you're already springing off loads of ideas, and sometimes nothing. But you know that, if you go away and do your research and look for inspiration, and, then ideas will form. And that's when it's really good to work with other creatives as well, because quite often things come out of collaboration and working with other people, and everybody, it's part of that thing that everybody works in their own way and everyone has their own idea of creativity and their own response to a brief. And therefore, if you get a couple of people, you can really spark ideas off each other.
Yeah. And I mean, actually, that's something else that in terms of creative thinking and how our brains work, that one of the things that has also come up in the episodes is how people think differently as well. So, I mean, there are two particular guests, for example, that I had on the podcast to talk about that because I think it's so interesting. So both in series 3, so Osman and Hannah both talked about just the way people think differently, and how actually, we can't all be everything. So therefore we need, whether you call them creative buddies or whether you're talking about people who help you in your business in a coaching or a practical perspective, everybody needs other people around them in the course of that process. And it's just, and that's part of knowing who you are and who you are creatively, and what you contribute to a process, what you struggle with, whether you are the person who has a million ideas and then just doesn't know what to do with them. But having different brains around, nothing would get done if you quite often nothing would get done if it was just one person.
Yeah.
Because that one person doesn't have all the skills and all the perspectives and all the strengths that everybody in the world has together.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's the thing I struggled with most when I went from being an agency down to just being me. Suddenly I was like, I haven't done this bit for a long time. And you also sort of, sometimes you can have ideas and objectively you just can't judge whether they're good or not. And so I've got a designer I work with, Emily, who's brilliant, and we will show each other initial ideas and be like, oh, I really like that one, and maybe you could just tweak that or tweak that. But even just someone else saying they really like it suddenly gives you the confidence to carry on with an idea when you were struggling with it. So I think getting that feedback is really interesting, because we're quite robust as creative people. Like, I think you're quite sure of yourselves in some ways, but then you can be quite insecure in other ways. So it's nice to get that validation.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, I was really fascinated about how often neurodiversity came up in your conversations. Has that been a surprise to you? Did you imagine they'd be the conversations you'd be having when you started the podcast?
I think, yes, I did know that would come up, just because having spent quite a lot of years being in and around creative worlds and working with creative people, ADHD in particular is something that's come up a lot over the last few years with people I know. So, people I've known for maybe 10 years. It almost feels like everyone I know is suddenly being diagnosed with ADHD, and they're not all. I mean, if I actually objectively wrote a list of people, it's not, but it does feel like. So naturally, I guess that's going to come out in the people that I spoke to, that some of them would perhaps pick up on that as a topic. So what was quite interesting to me was actually the places where it did come up, people were at different stages, which is quite interesting in terms of how they then manage their ideas and their own processes. So for example, in series 2, Al, at the time we had the conversation, I think had been diagnosed a year before with ADHD. So he's relatively early in the process of going through understanding how he was going to work with that, what that knowledge was going to give him. Abby had been diagnosed quite some time before, and so was very used to, she actually works with a coach, she's got a VA, so she'd found the right people to work with to kind of allow her to use her strengths, but have the support in place to make things happen in her business. And then in this recent series, the first episode was with Martin, who has talked quite a bit about ADHD in the past. I've seen him do talks on how that kind of has impacted part of what he does with his business. But he recently added an autism diagnosis, so AuDHD, which is when people have a diagnosis of both. So he was unpicking that a little bit in terms of understanding where the two kind of trade off against each other.
I am on the ADHD diagnosis journey myself, and I think there's a great relief in realizing that you might have ADHD, because all the things that you've just struggled with and beat yourself up about, oh, why can't I just do this? And everyone else seems to find it easy. And suddenly I was describing it to somebody as, it's like thinking you have a cold and then finding out you have the flu, and suddenly you're like, actually you go from just thinking, oh, why can't I just do this? It's only a cold, and battling through to going, oh my God, I was able to do that even though I actually had the flu. So it's just a complete mindset shift. And I think you just give yourself a bit more grace and you're a bit kinder to yourself. That's been my kind of biggest learning so far. Still very much in the process of trying to figure out how to maximize the bits I'm good at and get support for the bits that I can't do. But I think you're right. So many creative people, especially that I know, are getting later life diagnoses. And I think for me, my brain is so busy, and I just assumed everybody's brains were that busy. That's why idea generation comes quite easily. I think in the past it's been a little bit of a superpower, and now it's really causing me to struggle. So it's just, it is very, I found it really interesting listening to the episodes and seeing how closely those two are connected. And I wonder if, we were talking about every child being creative and then kind of them learning their way out of it. I wonder if you've got ADHD or neurodiversity, you can't learn your way out of it because it is literally the way you think. It's the way your brain's wired. So you hold on to that creativity a bit more. It would be interesting to explore that a little bit more. People with ADHD, I think, rely on certain tools to help them to manage things and structure things. But I also think, there's been a lot of really great examples on all of your podcasts about tools that people think to kind of hone their ideas, especially, or manage the process. Have you, what have been your best tips that you've picked up from the tools people have mentioned?
I think notebooks were discussed on quite a few of the episodes. So, Abby's episode and Claire Waite Brown, we had quite a chat about notebooks and digital tools, actually, because Trello seems to be one that creative people seem to like more than maybe others. There are a lot of project management tools out there, but often they're for people with very linear logical brains. I count myself among those people, but actually I don't like horrible boring tools so much. But something where you can see what's going on, that's something that's very useful. In fact, I think Martin mentioned something about, he had a tip about bank accounts. How bank accounts, some of them you can see the little pots of money, and he found that really interesting as somebody with ADHD who needs to see where things are, that actually being able to see where your money is in different places was quite helpful.
I use Sterling, and you can categorize each payment, income or external, and then it kind of summarizes it for you, and you've got little colored icons so you can see if that's a bill or if it's a income or if it's training or whatever. And that I really like that you can kind of categorize things.
Yeah, so definitely things where you can see things visually. I mean, I think I've talked to quite a few of the guests about Trello boards and how you might use those. And I think those are probably the ones that are most helpful. I
have a to-do list, which I really like. So as well as having a list of things I've got to do, when I've done them, I write a list every day of the things I've done, because otherwise a whole day can go by and I can be like, oh, I haven't done anything. And actually I've done loads. It just hasn't registered, especially if it wasn't the end of a process or I wasn't completing something. It was just a stage in a process and it doesn't register as being done. And I've found that really, really helpful, having a to-do list.
Yeah, that's a really good one, actually. And I think particularly some people, some creative people actually do struggle with that, don't they? To actually, even if they've completed something, actually, they just move on to the next thing because something else needs doing. And actually, it's important to celebrate success and be able to celebrate in a smaller way, just be able to know you've been doing something.
Yeah. A lot of the people you've spoken to, they do have creative jobs, they do make their living in a creative process. Was that deliberate? There is a lot, we've talked a lot about the fact there is creativity in other professions like law or science, or people that don't necessarily make money out of it, but they're very creative in their private life or in their side hustles, or people who don't think they're creative. Would you be really interested in talking to more of those people?
Yeah, I think it's the way that the podcast evolved is really how the guests ended up coming on, because they were people I knew and I sort of had some themes in mind that maybe I wanted to talk about. So I did want to talk about, for example, people like Sophie talking about crafts and about making time for creativity and bringing out the music and animation with Tabitha and Duncan were two guests in the recent series. So sort of I wanted to make sure that I covered lots of different aspects. And then I had some people who volunteered to be guests as well. So I think for the future, I would definitely be interested in talking to people with a slightly different angle. With, I think people who don't think they're creative but are. Yeah, that's probably a whole separate podcast, isn't it? I think
it's just hard to find them, isn't it? Because they wouldn't put their hand up and say, "Yes, talk to me about creativity," necessarily.
Yeah, it's probably a whole something else. But I think in terms of people who are talking about creativity, Hannah talked a bit about the work that she has done with lawyers, for example. I don't think I've touched on anyone in terms of science. There's not been anyone. I think really it's the whole point of the podcast is to just sort of explore different angles with it.
And at the beginning, you said that the reason you started the videos originally and then the podcast was to be more visible. Do you think you've achieved that, or has there been any other unexpected positives from starting to do the podcast?
I think there've been all sorts of positive things about it, actually, because it's something where if I'm talking to somebody, I can just say, "Oh, I've got a podcast," and it's creative conversations, and it means that somebody can go to listen to some of the episodes and they can get a bit of a feel for what I'm like to talk to, what I'm interested in, and hopefully they will find the topics interesting. It does mean that I'm able, certainly when the episodes are coming out, it means I'm able to be visible without actually making an effort to do anything else, because people can see that I'm still here. I've got a podcast episode out. I remember going to a networking event. It's probably about 6 months ago. And I arrived and it was actually being hosted by Martin, who was the first guest in series 3. He was hosting this event. And I remember walking into the event and he said, "Oh, Nina, I was listening to your podcast this morning." I mean, that's lovely, isn't it? If you can, if people start to know you for that thing and actually and people asking to be involved, that's always a good sign, isn't it? If people say, "Oh, I'd love to be a guest on your podcast." But it has also given me some opportunities to do things as well. So just sort of being known as somebody who's interested in the topic, has got me, I got to do an Instagram live. I have been a guest on a few podcasts myself. So, and always happy to be a guest on more. I've got a few things lined up, but always happy to do more.
Yeah. And I think for a podcast host, knowing that you're really comfortable to talk on a podcast and getting the sense that you've got plenty to say, makes you a good guest and somebody they would reach out to.
Yeah.
And will there be another series? Are you planning series 4?
I'm thinking about it because as I think you gathered it, it takes quite a lot of effort, and I think particularly, I've not helped myself by being very enthusiastic. So I know that sometimes it's taken up more of my time than maybe I wanted it to. Yeah. But I definitely have ideas for topics that I might want to talk about. So I'd like to talk about creative health, for example, because there is a national organisation that looks at creative health, and creative health is anywhere through from early years childcare all the way through to people in care homes. That actually doing creative activities can bring something to people. So there's all sorts of things within that. I'm interested in how it goes through, how creativity comes out in education, where it disappears, in terms of creative expression, but also where creative thinking comes in. So there's all sorts of things within education that might be interesting to talk about. And the dreaded AI, I think, the one thing that sets us apart is being creative and being, because it's coming from us being human. But I think there are all sorts of topics about the way we interact with AI tools and the impact that AI has on creativity. So I think there's probably interesting things to explore there as well. I have a few people who've already suggested that they'd like to be guests. They've filled out the form that you can find on my website. If you go to my website, ninalenton.co.uk, there's a section about the podcast, and there's a form there that you can just fill in with some details. And when I get to the point of planning it, I will then start getting in touch with people to have chats and things. I'm currently thinking that if I do something, it would be early 2027. But as with any things in self-employment, it's all subject to change. I might suddenly get enthusiastic in September and decide to do more. Who knows?
And in the meantime, there are 21 episodes for people to enjoy while they wait. Thank you so much for letting me interview you, Nina. It's been wonderful. I'm going to hand the hot seat back to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for interviewing me, and you were very nice to me. So, what I would say here is it does, this has only touched the surface of the kind of themes and the kind of topics, because there's so much to say about creativity anyway. Yeah. But there is also so much that we've touched on, and I realise I haven't even mentioned all of the guests. I referred to some of them in the conversation, but there's 21 of them. So 22, including this one. So I will just say, so from my perspective, if you want to find out more about what I do, my website's ninalenton.co.uk. I also have I actually have several books. I have Things I Know About Creativity, which starts with the premise that my doodled character creativity feels misunderstood and it's sad. And so through the course of the book, you will see different examples of creativity and some of the themes we've talked about here. And I also have a couple of other books. Weird Penguin's Thoughts on Freelance Life, which is
a penguin. That's how we got chatting, wasn't it? We both love a penguin.
I think so, yes. And and you wouldn't think that penguins related to being freelance, but actually they do. So, they do because I made them, because I just draw penguins, and there are lots of freelance topics that I was able to doodle about. And I've also got a guide to ideas in 22 doodles. So if you wanted to find out more about me and those books, that's ninalenton.co.uk. And where can we find you if we want to find out more about your business and the charities that you help?
Thank you. So my website is jg-creative.co.uk, or come and find me on LinkedIn, just Jo Grubb or JG Creative. Thank you, Nina.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being a guest and an interviewer on Creative Conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Creative Conversations. I'm Nina Lenton. I'm an untangler and coach, and you can find out more about my work and this podcast at ninalenton.co.uk.